Hey folks, Nick here from another BookTube channel. Today I'll be doing the Swan Song Post-Apocalypse book tag. This tag was started by Cliff from Cliff's Dark Gems, but I saw it done on Crystal's page, Fiber Artsy, and it seemed really fun, so I thought I'd give it a shot. All of the prompts in this tag are inspired by the book Swan Song by Robert McCammon, which is an amazing book. Highly recommend that if you haven't read it. But Swan Song can't be the answer to the actual questions here. So we'll go ahead, we'll get started with the first prompt, which is, it's the end of the world as we know it. Name a book with an abrupt or bad ending. I'm going with a bad ending, and I feel kind of bad because a lot of people love this book, but My Heart is a Chainsaw by Stephen Graham Jones has a bad ending. And it is a bit abrupt because it's an abrupt tonal change from the rest of the book as well. I have a full review of this up if you want to hear my full thoughts, but basically this book sets itself up as, for the first 3/4 of it as completely like natural, normal type of horror, like realistic horror, and then in the end it becomes completely supernatural, just kind of out of nowhere. So it feels very abrupt when you're reading it, and the ending honestly really ruined this book for me. The sequel is a lot better. The sequel fixes the problems of this book, in my opinion. But just as a first-time experience reading through this one, I felt like I read the wrong ending. Like I felt like it was a really good ending to a completely different book, and I'm still waiting to see the actual ending to the story written here. So that's my choice for the first one. Shattered Earth is the second prompt. Name a book that made you feel damaged and broken inside. I had a lot of trouble with this one because I don't really read a ton of books that do that to me. It's not really what I'm looking for in a book. But perusing my shelves, I did find something that probably gave me the closest feeling to feeling like broken. More for like my sense of like my humanity feels wounded. And that's going to be Mouse by Art Spiegelman, possibly the most important graphic novel ever published. It's about the Holocaust. It's the story of a Holocaust survivor, written and illustrated by his son. Art Spiegelman's father survived the Holocaust. This is his story before the war, through the war. And it is, it's heartbreaking. How could you read a real, true story about the Holocaust and not feel a little bit broken inside that this happened, in human history? Number 3, Sickness, Plague, Radioactive Poisoning. Name a book where a central character is affected with a disease or a disability. I chose disability for this one, and I'm choosing Dawn Shard by Brandon Sanderson. This is book 3.5 in the Stormlight Archive, and you don't see a lot of books, I guess in fantasy, at least I haven't, where the main character has a visible disability. Ryson is a wheelchair user in a world that is very much not designed for wheelchair users. There's a lot of parallels you can draw between her experience and our actual world as well, where we are still seeing not a lot of access to public places being provided to people that use mobility aids. So I think it's a really, really strong character, really good book as well. If you haven't read the Stormlight Archive, this might give you a good flavor, but you'd be a little bit lost. But highly recommend Dawn Shard. Next up, Good, Humane, Brave. Name a book that warmed your heart. And I don't know why, but Stardust by Neil Gaiman really stood out to me for this one. There's evil in this book. There are evil witches and there are assassins and stuff like that. But this is like the perfect, just kind of light-hearted fantasy book, in my opinion. It has a happy ending. It's just a joyful reading experience. It's very easy to read, and it just puts a smile on your face. So I would say this one definitely warmed my heart. Number 5, Evil and Warlords. Name a book that contains your most hated character. I was thinking to go Stormlight Archive again here, but I already used that. I was going to use maybe Sidious or Moash, but I went with something completely different actually. And I don't own a copy of this book, surprisingly. But One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Nurse Ratched is a bitch. She is the worst. And I honestly, it's been so long since I've read it. I don't know how much of my opinion is being colored by the movie, which was, one of the best villainous performances of all time by Louise Fletcher. But she was awful in the book too. I remember that. So I do actually, this kind of put me in the mind of like, I want to reread that book because it's been so long. But yeah, Nurse Ratched, the worst. Number 6, Struggle to Survive. Name a book where a character or characters put aside morals, ethics, and values in order to survive. For this, I'm choosing Mine by Robert McCammon. Because Laura Claiborne, the main character here, has her newborn son kidnapped. She was a flower child of the 60s. She never did a violent act in her life, and she has to put a lot of that aside in the pursuit of tracking down her son and rescuing him from the insane Mary Terror. So this is a fantastic, phenomenal book. Also have a full review of this up on the channel if you're interested in hearing more. 7, Absent Technology. Name a book that makes you think of a life without modern gadgets. I was thinking Ray Bradbury, and I was thinking maybe Something Wicked This Way Comes, but I settled on Dandelion Wine because this is a book. It's basically a book of vignettes in this young boy's life in just one summer, and this is written at a time where technology was, it was the 50s, the 60s. I forget what decade it was. So by nature, it doesn't have the technology we see today. And I love the feeling of reading a Ray Bradbury book where he's talking about just the human experience with nature and just making the most of what's around you. Like if you don't have a lot, you're still able to have, adventures, have a nice time, stuff like that. This is a really beautiful, bittersweet book. Absolutely adore this one. So if you've only read Ray Bradbury's sci-fi classics, definitely do yourself a favor, read Dandelion Wine. Number 8, Societal Collapse. Name the most dark, depressing book you have ever read. I don't know if it's ever. I don't read a ton of depressing books. Again, it's not something that I look for in a reading experience. But somewhat recently, I read Pen Pal by Dathan Auerbach. That book was bleak. That book was really bleak. I have a review of that up on the channel as well. There's nothing good that happens in that book to the main character or to any of his family or friends. It is just top to bottom people having bad experiences. Really good book, but oof, boy, you need to take a day after that you need to read Stardust after that to make yourself feel better. Or you read this next book, number 9, There Is Always Hope. Name the most optimistic book you've ever read. This one I'm choosing Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. This is another one. It's another very heartwarming book. I'm calling it the most optimistic book I've ever read because it's like the story of a small business succeeding almost right away. And it's the story of a bunch of people being charitable to each other in a small town that you wouldn't expect them to. It's about finding the exact person you need to find when you need them. Like everything just kind of works out. It's very low stakes. And that's like the appeal of it. So I consider it very optimistic for that purpose, for that reason. It's just, you get everything you need out of it. Everything works out. Everyone's happy. Everyone has a good time, which doesn't really happen in real life. So it's very optimistic to me. And 10, the final prompt is Fresh Beginnings. Name a book that has a perfect opening paragraph or chapter that really draws you into the story. And I thought really hard about this one. I found a lot of books that have great opening sentences, but when I think of a great opening chapter, It by Stephen King is, I think, one of the strongest opening chapters ever, because If you haven't read it, and if you've ever seen any of the movies, this is the opening chapter is Georgie having the first encounter with Pennywise the Clown in the sewer. It's one of the most iconic scenes of all time, most iconic horror moments of all time, and it's just absolutely perfect. And the opening paragraph is great. It's the terror, which would not end for another 28 years, if it ever did end, began, so far as I know or can tell, with a boat made from a sheet of newspaper floating down a gutter swollen with rain. And the entire chapter is just absolutely riveting. And then the whole book after that is super riveting as well. So that's where I'm going to wrap up. I don't know who I'm going to tag yet, but if you see this and you want to take part, go ahead, do it. If you don't have a channel of your own, but you still want to provide some answers, let me know in the comments what you would put for some of these prompts. Thank you for spending some time with me today, but now it's time to get back to reading.